Ting, 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 two, 1, 2.
The Kahanes, how are y'all? You're well. Sometimes. Sit down right there somewhere. I would say sit in the front. So I'm gonna. So I'll pull up here and presentation mode. So it's already I get used to it. Unless you want me to control the slides, which would be really funny. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, everybody. You're probably wondering why I gathered you all here today. My name is Joel Christian Gill. I am the chair, the inaugural chair of the MFA in Visual Narrative here at Boston University, which is just a fancy way of saying comics at a Research One. And it is my great pleasure to introduce each and every one of the 5 cartoonists who will soon be my colleagues moving into the world today. They're going to be talking about their thesis project that they've been working for 2 years on. I promise you that some of us will not cry. I can't promise you that we won't cry because we've been watching these things and just in the practice rounds, we've been seeing people cry a lot. So I'm going to introduce. So what I'll do, the way this is going to go, I'll do a little. I'll just introduce somebody in their name and their title, and then they'll come up and they'll give you the presentation. There might be chance for like one question depending on how much time we have, and then I'll come up and do the same thing, and I'll bring up the other slide. So first off, I'll just jump right into it. La Flèche Jason is going to be talking about her graphic novel thesis project, which is called Heartwash. So if you guys could give me a warm welcome.
If I could, I would go back in time and be for my mother, the mother that she needed. You see, I was born in the 4th generation of a cult. That means that my parents and their parents were born in the cult. It means that the cult is the only way of life my family ever knew. By the time we were born, it was built into our DNA. My mama is a sweetheart. She is funny and loving. She thinks tiny things are adorable, and she will make you a cake from scratch for your birthday. My mother has also suffered from intense anxiety and depression her whole life. She has battled crippling low self-esteem. She doesn't believe in herself. She needs a lot of naps. And she failed to protect me from the cult. My mother failed me, and I don't blame her. Like me, she was born in a generations-old culture of psychological and emotional abuse. And that abuse taught her that she is powerless, that she should not believe in herself, that she cannot do things, and that it is useless to even consider going against the cult. The control of the cult is so strong because the cult leaders teach people how to control each other, and they put belonging at stake. If you break the rules made up by the cult ministers, your loved ones will shun you in the name of God. The human need for love and belonging is such a powerful force that the fear of being shunned persuades an entire community into compliance, and the guilt of shunning your loved ones can only be soothed by actually believing that you're doing it for a higher power. You believe what you must. You think what you must. You do what you must. You convince yourself to keep your family together and to keep your conscience clear. My mother tried to protect me the best way she knew how, which was by teaching me how to survive in the cult, how not to be shunned, how to align myself with the groupthink in order to always be allowed to stay. Heartwashed is the story of my childhood and how the cult controlled my family with fear and manipulation until the only thing that could have been harder than leaving everyone that I had ever shared a beautiful memory with, everyone I ever loved, behind, was to stay and watch everyone suffer and be complicit in the suffering by staying. Here's how the story goes. The early days of my childhood were wonderful. My funny and warm parents adored each other and loved my 3 siblings and I. We lived in the idyllic countryside of Montreal, down the hill from my aunt and cousins. We attended church and joyous, boisterous, warm, loud church functions. We swam in the stream and picked wild strawberries in the summer, and my father took us sledding and skiing in the winter. My father often had to be away on long work trips to support us. And when he was home, he and I were inseparable. He called me his little shadow because I followed him everywhere, even to the creepy wood room in the basement, which was a doorless cement cave of a room lit only by a single bulb and a pull chain that I couldn't reach. I was afraid of the dark, but I felt safe anywhere with Pa. He answered my questions seriously and honestly, and he gave me reasons to feel safe. And he was the only adult in my life that I could count on for help, always. Everything was right when he was home. He once told me that he wanted to make sure to be home as much as possible between the work trips because he wanted his kids to know and to have good memories with their Pa, and to know that he would be there for us. I knew that he was there for me, but I also knew that our time together was limited. and that he would have to go back to work. When he was gone, I would be on my own again to deal with all the things that scared me. The dark, the woods, wolves, dealing with things alone. If Pat had his way, he would always be around to banish my fears. At that time, I had a recurring nightmare about wolves circling the house, looking for a way in. My father was never in these nightmares. The house was always dark and eerie, and I felt so vulnerable. And for some reason in the dream, the doors on the locks were powerless from keeping the wolves out, powerless to keep the wolves out. I slept fitfully, often, dreaming about my sister being overtaken by wolves in the house, not knowing that we were already prey in real life. One night, when my father was away on a work trip, 5 ministers came to the house to announce that he had been excommunicated. I was only 9, but I already knew without asking that that meant that I would never see him again, and that I should not be sad about that. Within weeks, aunts converged on the house, helped my mother pack, store, or get rid of everything we owned. We were sent to California to live with my grandparents. And my father came home to an empty house, his wife, his 3 young daughters, and his son gone. My life turned upside down, and I had no option but to accept what had happened. To make sense of the grief, I had to detach myself from my love for my father and make myself believe the new cult belief that my father was literally the devil, that he had abandoned me to be with Satan, that he's a bad man and a worse father and always had been. It was a good thing that the poor Jasson girls had their grandfather to rescue them. And I was angry at my father for leaving me. And I was hungry for any affection I got. Within 6 months, I adopted my grandfather as my new father. And I felt guilt for a long time after that. My sister Nini did not form that bond with him. She was 6 years older than me, and she knew more about the move than I did. She was a teenager. And she rebelled with simple acts of independence, like getting a job, missing curfew. And my grandfather would not tolerate her nonconformity, and he kicked her out of the house. I remember her sitting on the front steps on her last day, waiting for her ride with just a paper bag of clothes. I was suddenly robbed of a second family member for what seemed to me no apparent reason. And I was struggling to feel safe in a community that had, without warning, vanished my father and my sister in the name of God, whatever that meant. I started to notice that we paid for unconditional love. I'm sorry. We paid for conditional love. I wish it was unconditional. We paid for conditional love with unconditional faith and obedience. I started to notice my mother's powerlessness against my grandfather and the ministers, and I started to notice that it wasn't just her. We were all powerless. At age 15, I didn't yet recognize all of my mother's naps as depression. I didn't yet understand that my mother had all the symptoms of an abuse victim. Depression, low self-esteem, anxiety, toxic shame, helplessness, and that those are what unquestioning obedience had given her. And those are what were preventing her from being the mother she wanted to be for us. When my father returned 7 years later to fight for custody for me and my younger brother, I learned the truth of his disappearance. He didn't leave. We were kidnapped. My mother, the only adult, was psychologically kidnapped, forced to choose between her whole family, her whole way of life, and her husband, with no support whatsoever if she chose her husband. Man believed that Pa had betrayed her, abandoned her by getting himself kicked out. He had stupidly challenged the minister's power, and they excommunicated him to silence him. It was that simple, it was that effective. To maintain the totality of their control, they sacrificed the wholeness of my family like we were lambs on an altar. The thing is, everyone in a cult is forced to choose between belonging and freedom. And most people choose belonging out of fear, and no matter what you choose, no one escapes without a severely damaged perception of love and self-worth. And healing from that damage is a monumental story meant for a whole other book. When I chose freedom at age 17, I had to start life anew in the big unknown world. It was terrifying, but I'm a lucky one because my parents and my siblings broke the shunning rules to stay in my life. And most people in the cult aren't so lucky. Most lose parents, siblings, even children. And I feel only sadness for all of the people who shunned me to survive. Intergenerational trauma is a story with no real beginning that can have an end. Someone can break the cycle. This is the way things are, people say. And that's true until someone says, no, it's not. Not for me, not for my children. The wolves only have power if the lambs obey. This book is dedicated to the cycle breakers. Thank you. We have questions? Yeah, questions?
That was great.
I guess I answered all the questions. Feel free to contact, oh, yes, sir.
Everything about this, very, very big. I'm interested in the style of art and how that has progressed for this project. Is this similar to stuff you've done before? Did you develop a style specifically for this project?
This style is just the evolution of my style. My vice professor would say your style is just the drawing style that happens when you stop trying and learn what works for you. It is similar to what my drawings used to be, but it's just my style working into itself. Yes? The cycle breaking when I was younger? When I was younger, survival was the only thing that was important. The drawing, I drew, but not to survive. But now drawing is very important because there are some things that I think words can be helped by images to communicate. I always knew I was going to write this book, even before I knew I was going to make it a graphic memoir. But now when I discovered graphic memoirs, I realized this is what I need. Yeah. Yes.
Where do you think
Wow, that's a good, flattering question. It doesn't feel like confidence every day, truthfully. Some days I'm like, oh my God, I'm so cool and talented. But some days I'm like, oh my God, I'm so whiny. And it's honestly, here's what I say about writing this book on the days that it's hard. the only thing worse than doing it is not doing it. And so I am doing it just one step at a time. And I conceived of this book as a graphic novel 3 years ago. I found the diary entry. So started as an idea, and then grad school made it possible as an object, as a thing. And you just, now it's just, instead of dreaming every day, it's drawing every day. And I'm very grateful to myself for getting myself that far. Thank you for that question.
Okay, let's get to the next person. I have to do a screen share so I can change this, the screen sharing so I can get to the right place. So sorry, guys, if I fumble through this for a section. What's that? I know, Inception. Multiple Joels. Let's do this. So next up will be Camila Kerwin, who's going to, I'm going to introduce her, but I'm going to make sure that everything's up here. So I'm just talking while I do this so y'all don't just stare at me. I know I'm dope looking, so there's a lot to look at, but I'm just like, give me a second. So just want to make sure I got everything going here. Okay, so Camila Kerwin is going to be talking about her thesis project, which is called The Leading Cause. So if you guys could give me a warm welcome for Camila Kerwin.
Good afternoon. Thank you. In 2004, a young father named Manny Oliver decided that he was going to take his son Joaquin on a road trip up to Cocoa Beach in Florida. It was going to be just the two of them, a special father-son trip. Joaquin was about 4 years old. They throw a bunch of stuff in the trunk, soccer ball, baseball bat, shovels, and pails, and they take off. And when they get there, they waste no time in having fun. They throw on their swim trunks, head right down to the beach, order ice cream cones, bury each other in the sand, order hot dogs, play with the frisbee. They're splashing around. Everything is going great. And then suddenly, Joaquin notices something. And he says, "Papi, why are there so many people here?" And Manny looks around and he realizes his son is right. There's like a crowd forming. There's a commotion happening. And he says, "I don't know. Let me go ask." And so he stands up and he approaches the nearest stranger and he says, "Excuse me, sir, sorry to bother you. What's going on here? Why are there so many people here?" And the guy looks at Manny and he says, "You don't know?" And Manny's like, "No, I don't know. What's going on?" And the guy says, "There's a rocket launch scheduled for today from the Kennedy Space Center. It's visible from here. Everybody here has known for weeks. We're all gathered here to watch it. It's happening in like 5 minutes." And Manny goes, "Oh, wow." And he turns to his son and he says, "Joaquin, come here. We're about to see something really cool." They get up, they find a spot in the crowd, and within minutes, the whole sky is lighting up with the most dazzling spectacle of human invention either of them has ever seen before. Joaquin was mesmerized, and he looked at Manny as though he were Superman and he hadn't even planned it. It was a magic moment. And as time went on, Joaquin knew about magic moments. Manny had talked to him about magic moments. He said, "Joaquin, you and I, we're going to spend a lot of time together. We're going to do a lot of stuff together. I'm going to take you to Yankee Stadium. I'm going to be the first one to take you to the Empire State Building. We're going to go see Guns N' Roses perform live. We're going to do a lot of stuff together because one day when I'm not here anymore, I want you to have magic moments to remember me by. That's my philosophy as your father. And as time went on, they did do all those things. They did go to Yankee Stadium. They did go see the Empire State Building, front row seats to Guns N' Roses. But what Manny didn't know then was that all those magic moments would be for him. Because about 12 years after he and Joaquin saw the rocket launch from Cocoa Beach in Florida, Joaquin was one of the 17 people killed at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School at the mass shooting there in Parkland, Florida. He was 17 years old. I first heard this story about 5 years ago as a public radio producer. I was collecting stories for the 1-year anniversary of the Parkland shooting, and I spoke with Manny and Patricia Oliver, Joaquin's parents. And it is in many ways the seed that planted the idea for The Leading Cause, the nonfiction graphic novel I'm working on that profiles 5 kids who have died from different forms of gun violence in the US, including Joaquin. And let's talk about guns in America. Guns are a big part of the story we tell ourselves about this country. Not so far from here, 1775, Paul Revere took his midnight ride to announce that the British were coming. It's a little bit of an oversimplified story, but the British occupying forces were indeed on their way to seize a stockpile of guns from the colonists. They were coming to take our guns. That's a true story about the American Revolution. Today, there are more guns than people in the US. Guns are everywhere. They've become a sort of symbol of rugged individualism, of freedom. They've become a chip in our ever-intensifying political discourse. Guns are part of our American DNA. But there's a problem. In 2020, guns surpassed car accidents for the first time ever as the leading cause of death for kids in the US. And as with most systemic issues, this one is felt unequally across racial lines. Guns have been the leading cause of death for Black kids for at least 20 years. The numbers are not good. There is no good way to spin them. But I don't want to tell a story about numbers. I want to tell a story about people, kids, like Jeffrey Taylor. Jeffrey loved superheroes. He was frequently bouncing around his living room dressed up in his Superman or his Batman costume, famously hyperactive, big, toothy smile. Ethan was really good with dogs. He could calm down like any anxious dog that crossed his path. His family called him the dog whisperer. He loved good food. He and his dad were on a mission to find the best lobster roll in New England. Micaiah Wilson, tomboy, she loved playing basketball and football over the summer. She loved walking down the block with her much older sister to get an ice cream cone. And of course, Joaquin. Everybody loved Joaquin. Big personality, funny, stylish. He was the cool kid who made you feel cool for being a little weird, for being yourself. All of these kids are now gone, lost to different forms of gun violence. The kinds that get a lot of news coverage, like mass shootings, and the kinds that get hardly any coverage at all, like an unsecured handgun tucked underneath a parent's bed. And we wouldn't be talking about the stories of these kids were it not for the stories of the adults who have shaped their world, often right in the background of their lives. Take, for example, Marion Hammer. Marion Hammer grew up poor on her grandparents' farm in South Carolina. She and her family relied on shotguns to kill small game, squirrels and rabbits to put food on the table. Guns were an important part of her life. In the 80s, she says that one day she was walking to her car at night in a parking lot when suddenly a group of men started to follow her. It's worth noting here that Marion is famously quite small. She barely passes 5 feet. She was scared. They were shouting obscenities, threatening her, she says. She says that it's the revolver that she was able to pull out of her purse in that second and brandish to the group of men that saved her from being assaulted that day or worse. She stood her ground. And indeed, about 20 years later, it was Marion Hammer who designed the country's very first stand your ground law in Florida. You all are probably familiar with this one. It's the law that gives you the right to shoot anybody who you perceive as a threat. It's the law that pretty much protected George Zimmerman from prison when he shot and killed Trayvon Martin, unarmed 17-year-old Black kid. About 38 states have since adopted some form of stand your ground since Marion Hammer designed it in Florida. She would go on to become the first woman president of the NRA and arguably its most important lobbyist ever, pushing gun rights bill after gun rights bill after gun rights bill, first in Florida and then often adopted by much of the rest of the country. Maybe she thought she was protecting women. The list of people is long. There's Harlan Carter, former chief of the entire Border Patrol. In the 70s, Harlan Carter was part of a right-wing group of people who basically single-handedly transformed the NRA from an old, dusty marksmanship club, think Boy Scouts, but for adults, not that interested in the Second Amendment at all, to the massive, gargantuan gun lobbying juggernaut we're all familiar with today. He became its executive vice president for many years, and membership tripled under his tenure. It was flooded with cash, flooded with power. And what people didn't know, what Harlan Carter had kept secret, is that when he was 17 years old, he had shot and killed a 15-year-old kid named Ramon Casiano, a Mexican kid who Harlan Carter believed had some sort of involvement in the theft of his family's car. No evidence. Harlan Carter was convicted of murder and later in a Texas appeals court acquitted on self-defense. And years later, when it finally came out that a convicted murderer was now the executive vice president of the NRA, it didn't even matter. It had no effect on his career. Of course, not all gun rights people are right-wingers. Take Huey Newton, for example, the co-founder of the Black Panthers, so outraged with the police brutality he was seeing in his community and all across the country that he encouraged Black people to arm themselves, which was legal in California at the time. Openly carry a rifle that's loaded. Police the police. In fact, one of California's strongest gun control laws on the books today is what many people would fairly describe as a racist reaction to the Black Panthers' policy of self-armament in the name of anti-racism. It was signed by a Republican. The idea of self-armament in the name of anti-racism isn't new. Think of the New England preacher and abolitionist Henry Ward Beecher, very outspoken abolitionist in the 19th century. He secretly sent shipments of rifles to Black people fleeing the South in crates marked as Bibles. They informally became known as Beecher's Bibles, a white man of the cloth who believed that the gun was the only equalizing tool in a racist society. What I'm trying to get at here is that it's complicated, isn't it? It's messy. It's surprising sometimes. The people involved in the cultivation of our country's gun culture and gun legislation are complicated people with complicated backstories and motivations. The Leading Cause isn't a book about victims and villains. It's a book about people. It's a book that aims to fairly and honestly answer the question, how did we get here? And who have we lost? It would not be an exaggeration to say that I thought about this story about the rocket every single day for over a year after I spoke with Manny and Patricia Oliver that day. And maybe on some level for me, it was personal. I grew up in a house with guns. My late stepfather, who I loved very much, was a big gun guy. He had a big safe full of rifles, handguns, you name it, in his study. And so maybe on some level, this book is an effort to simulate a difficult conversation with a loved one that I'll never be able to have. But I hope that maybe it prompts readers to have that difficult conversation with their loved one. It's my ambition that this book do many things, that it offer context for gun culture, gun legislation, gun history, information about how to be part of a solution, right? Hope for how to reduce gun deaths. But most importantly, it's my hope that this book authentically and truthfully portray the lives of the kids who have been lost to this, that it act as a tribute to them, their dreams, their idiosyncrasies, their pet peeves, their personalities. There's a moment when you speak to the parents of kids who have died this way that you realize that you miss them too. You've never met them, you never will meet them, but you miss him, you miss her. And maybe that's the only appropriate place to begin this hard conversation, is from first feeling what's been lost. Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for one question if there is one. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, I have a background in public radio. I worked for about 10 years in different public radio shops. I was at StoryCorps when I talked to Manny and Patricia Oliver. And I guess comics was kind of my first love. I loved drawing as a kid. I was a big Calvin and Hobbes reader. It felt like the thing I kind of put aside because it seemed impractical. And it was my wife who gave me the courage to really try it, and be brave and take the chance and go deeper into that dream. So I guess just right people, right place at the right time. Thank you so much.
Wives are great. As someone who has a fantastic wife, I can tell you that's that is a heaven sent. Next up, we have Avanji Vaze, who's going to talk about her thesis project, which is called Come to the Table. You're a little closer.
Thank you.
Oh, my bad.
I did come to the table. This is a comedy cookbook for queers. Hello, everyone. I'm Avanji. In a fictional world taken over by mushrooms, a group of artists in a polycule have a cooking competition to determine who will get the most attention. So you might ask me, Avanji, what is a polycule? It's when all of these people are in a closed network where they're all in a relationship with each other. So obviously, it gets complicated sometimes. So I'm gonna take you along the characters. Aina, who's a musician, Zev, who is a writer, Mani, who's a cartoonist, Tara, who's a painter, Yas, who's a poet, Sri, who's a music director, and Pan, a filmmaker. They all live in a house called Vrindavan House. Vrindavan means porch in Hindi. It also means utopia in some contexts. So Vrindavan House is where all of these people come together. And the story is narrated by John, the mushroom. So what is an Avanji? Avanji means daughter of the earth, but that is simply not true. I am the daughter of these two people, Dipali and Sanjay Vaze. And I grew up in Mumbai, in India. So, sorry. I had a lonely childhood. I am an only child. my parents were working most of the time, and I didn't have many friends. So a community in my adulthood now gives me belonging and joy, here and elsewhere. So you might ask, have I been in a polycule? Sort of. During COVID, I lived with a few of my friends. We were all working on art projects, and we decided to live together because working at home simply wasn't an option. So we used to do everything together, cook together, clean together. There was drama, conflict, but mostly it strengthened our friendship. One thing that bonded us together was food. We used it to impress, to express love, but mostly to one-up each other. We got super into pickling. We made bread, we made cakes, we made tacos from scratch. Everything had to be better than the previous thing. So living with artists when the world is lonely, you might ask the question, what do we create when there's no one to create for? Artists use creation as a way of expression, to be seen, but mostly to tell people what they think about the world that they live in. In this book, these artists are filled with the compulsion to create. When there is no one to create for, what do we do? Sometimes we create drama. I'm going to read a few pages from my book that gives a sense of the conflict that's about to arise. You have nothing to worry about, John. It's only a matter of time. Just be your charming self, says the president to John. She lives with so many distractions. Do you want them eliminated? No. Because we can make that happen. They're artists living together. It's bound to implode at some point. As we all know, we're all very temperamental. Back at Vrindavan House, Tara is obviously annoyed because no one's looking at her. Yaz is looking at her phone. Mani and Aina are holding hands, and Pawn is getting affection from everywhere. Sri is feeding Pawn. Zev is feeding Pawn. It is dinner time. Tara grows more enraged with the time. Pawn is getting too much attention. I would like to bring something up to the group. Psst, psst. Shh, go on. As I was saying, can we do this after dinner? No, this is the only time we sit together. Dinner rules also mean that no one will fight with me. Rule number 37, lunch or dinner, no fighting at the table. Anger, jealousy, ugly emotions are present in friendship as well as relationships. Platonic or romantic relationships are important. They build us to become who we are. Safe relationships are where there is the ability to express these emotions, and these guys do that. The effect of our surroundings and feeling blocked creates due to conflict being created, does not allow our ability to make art. And this is a book that is a celebration of just that, difficult emotions in a funny, silly relationship. The goal of my work, in any form that it may be, is to generate empathy and understanding. The world is getting lonelier and it's getting difficult to exist in it. And I hope that this book, through lightness and humor and other work of mine, does the same. Thank you. We have time for questions. Or Lee. Yeah. Could you repeat the question? Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm very nervous. Go on. Um, yes.
How she developed the story and the characters, taking herself sort of away from other characters that were not supposed to be inspired by her.
So I have always been driven by character stories. People, characters interest me. I think they're mirrors to humanity in a sense. And the human experience is so oriented with people that we resemble the characters in the book, if you know what I'm saying. Like, we see ourselves as the pictures that have been drawn in a book, which was how that these characters tell the story. They're just me. They're parts of me. They're parts of my friends. They're parts of the people that I've been working with in grad school. You see yourself in these characters and you expect them to react in certain ways, and that builds the narrative. Thank you.
I think I forgot to mention that we will be having a reception across the street at 8:55 after this. And so if you guys are interested in some of these books, these cartoonists have their books available. So you might be able to get a copy. I don't know if they're going to give them to you or you might have to Venmo somebody. I don't know. But I just want to let you know that there are some people who are going to have some. So next up, we have Ariel Cheng Kohane, who is going to read from her book, High Noon. So if you all give me a welcome, Ariel.
That's in case of emergencies. Hello, everyone. My name is Ariel Chen Kohane, and this is my graphic novel, High Noon. As you can probably tell from my names, I am Chinese and Jewish. My first and last names are Jewish, and my middle name is Chinese. It is my mom's name, and it was important to my dad that my sister and I both have our mom's last name as our middle name, and hence the emojis that I use. One thing that's really, can I pick this up, the microphone? Is that okay? Okay, perfect. Great. Okay, cool. We're freewheeling it. One of the cool things about being half Chinese and Jewish is that it allows for lots of very fun coincidences. For example, this was me in Tel Aviv in 2020. I bet you didn't expect to see an Asian store there of all places. Not Asian grocery store, by the way, just Asian store. And then I took a picture of myself with a label that says Made in China. I was very pleased with myself. I was born in the United States, but I felt it was relevant. But why am I telling you this? This is relevant because this is a story about Chinese and Jewish cowboys. Thank you, thank you. So our story. High Noon follows half Chinese and Jewish gunslinger Fei Lin, whose real name is Fei Lin Weiss, and she enlists the help of a band of outlaws in her quest for revenge. But what is her quest for revenge, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. When Fei was a little girl, a crooked sheriff named Eli Tavers burned her house down with her parents inside, which left her orphaned.
Faye was taken in by kind Chinese laborers along a fictional branch of the Southern Pacific Railroad and became a gun for hire. We're just gonna put that there for now. I don't have time for this. 9 years later, Faye returns to New Mexico, where she's from, and decides it's time to avenge her parents' death. But there's a problem. Tavers, that's him, is the mayor of one of the wealthiest towns between Las Cruces, New Mexico, and El Paso, Texas. If you don't know where Las Cruces, New Mexico is, that's okay. I had to look up what is the biggest town in New Mexico, and it was Albuquerque, and I was like, that's too far away, so we have to move it somewhere else. So this is the second biggest town currently in New Mexico. Towers is untouchable. Phase 1 17-year-old girl. This guy's the mayor. She can't take him down alone. What's she gonna do? Well, during her search, she meets a friendly Jewish merchant whose name is Levinson, and he tells her a story about his run-in with an infamous group of outlaws called the High Noon Gang. Murder, arson, highway robbery, loitering. You name it, they did it. But their most notorious crime was robbing the Tumbleweed Bank in broad daylight. And this happened to be the town that Eli Tavers was presiding over as sheriff at the time. This gives Faye an idea. She finds and reunites the former High Noon Gang members, Shootout McCloud, Lucky Levi, Ghost, and Jimmy the Kid. Jimmy the Kid is when the story takes place, she is an adult woman. Jimmy is a man's name. It is supposed to be funny. This is one of the running jokes in my comic. You can laugh. Thank you, thank you. She's got the right idea. And one thwarted horse theft, bandit showdown, and crashed wedding later, they're ready to take on the law, or the corrupted bent law, as it is. But wait! At this moment, we discover the 4 members of the High Noon Gang have been hiding something. They're all Jews. Interesting thing to hear myself say out loud into a microphone. And Tavers is planning to make it from mayor to governor. If he does, though, the future for Jews in New Mexico is going to become very, very, very bleak. He does not like Jews. And, okay, get ready for this. The High Noon Gang renames themselves the High Noon Gang. Thank you, thank you, thank you, audience plant. Chai in Hebrew, for those of you who don't know, means life. It is also symbolized by the letters Chaf and Yud, which write out 18 in Hebrew. And it makes for a very, very satisfying pun. And if you know Hebrew, you could also call them the Chai Nun Gang, because Nun is that other letter at the end. It's on a dreidel. Thank you. I'm so loving this laugh. Thank you, thank you. The High Noon Gang hide their Jewish identities from each other, even though they're thick as thieves, pun intended. And this was common for Jewish immigrants who came to the States in the 1800s. Many Jews who came here were persecuted because they were Jewish. And these 5 hide their Judaism because they're afraid of how society will treat them if they find out who they really are. And this is something that Jews all over the world have struggled with throughout our long history. High Noon touches on identity, belonging, and kinship, which we see through the eyes of an unlikely group of society's outcasts. Don't worry though, while my story has some more serious moments, it's mostly funny and exciting. Ariel, how did you even come up with an idea like this? I was 17, like Faye, and I was at a summer film program at Emerson College. And while I was working on my films, I thought, man, they don't make adventure films like they used to in the early 2000s. What if there was a Western and the hook was that the main character is A, a girl, and B, the daughter of a Chinese railroad worker? That would be awesome, man. I'm a genius. I can't wait to be a film director so I can make this movie. And I had no idea that what I had just described was the show Kung Fu. I was very disappointed to find this out. But much like how Itami Juzo's film Tampopo was called a ramen noodle western, and there I circled it so you know I'm not making this up. And yes, this is an image I ripped off of Amazon because it was the only good quality one I could find. It's fine. My story is a matzo ball soup and lo mein western. Thank you for. I originally set the story in the Wild West because it allowed me to put my main character, who would later become Faye, in an environment in which biracial and even Chinese people were far less common in the United States. My characters have ways of speaking and telling stories that I see reflected in my conversation with other Jews, and Faye shares moments with the Chinese laborers that are reminiscent of memories I have of spending the day in Chinatown with my own family, eating food and celebrating. But as I worked on High Noon, I noticed I had a really hard time writing Faye without putting in little Jewishisms. Originally, when I wrote the story, Faye was just half Chinese and not Jewish. And I worried that making a Jewish and Chinese character would be far too specific and people would think I'm basing Faye too much off of myself. And I thought to myself, you know, what kind of story has 5 Jewish cowboys in the same gang? And plus, there were only like, what, 5 other Asian Jews out there? Would anyone else even relate to this story? But luckily, one of my professors told me that every cartoonist's life makes its way into their stories. If Faye is Chinese and Jewish, that makes her stand out, and people will be able to tell that I have a personal connection with my characters and my story. And another said, okay, but what if you just made them all Jews? That would be an awesome twist, and then you can call it High Noon. But I was already 2 steps ahead of him because I'd already come up with that pun, and it was in a few slides ago. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why am I telling this story? And who is it for? Well, when I was a little girl, my parents and teachers would read me wonderful books like We Eat Rice, How My Parents Learned to Eat, Everybody Cooks Rice. A lot of these books are about food because because it's easy and fun to write about. Lots of people can bond over it. And other books like Sammy Spider's First Passover, Half and Half, and How Do Dinosaurs Say Happy Hanukkah? And these were wonderful books to read because I thought they were very warm and friendly, and they celebrated mixed race families and multiracial families and a dinosaur saying Happy Hanukkah. Kids love dinosaurs. Kids love Hanukkah. But when I grew up and I left home, which was a town with a very large Jewish and Chinese population, I noticed that not all of the media I consumed was as friendly or warm and inviting as the ones I had grown up with. And I wanted to create a story that celebrated both sides of my heritage, but for a different age group. I wanted to create High Noon for other Asian Jews out there. In 2022, my sister and I, that's us, gathered Asian Jews from both of our universities, and we had them at BU for a kosher Chinese dinner, which sounds very specific, but it's very delicious. Trust me on that. And we talked about the kinds of media we consumed and the questions that we all get asked and the experiences that we have in common, which are a lot. And although we're a small community within an already small community, there are quite a few of us, and we want to share our stories, and we want others to know that people like them exist all around the world. And as you can see, there are at least 8 of us. But most of all, I wanted to create the kind of comic that I wanted to read as a teenager. I wanted to create something that made people laugh and made people cry and love my book as much as I had loved the ones that I was read when I was growing up. And I wanted to showcase Jewish and Chinese characters who do badass things and go on adventures. And I wanted readers to look at the High Noon Gang and say, wow, those guys are cool. Just so we're clear, drinking, smoking, and shooting guns does not necessarily make a person cool, and especially not if you do them all at the same time, because that's illegal, I'm pretty sure. Besides, have you ever seen a Chinese cowboy? What about a Jewish one? Now you've seen both. You're welcome. And now I'm going to read you some pages from High Noon. To set this up, this scene is a flashback of Levinson's encounter with the High Noon Gang in Tumbleweed. And Levinson isn't a super reliable storyteller, and he tends to go on tangents and to omit things that he deems as unimportant details, such as the fact that his identical twin brother is Lucky Levi, one of the members of the High Noon Gang, the guy with the eye patch. And another thing is a character named Deputy Sheriff Nick Healy plays a big role in this scene. And that's Nick Healy. It's not to be confused with any former presidential candidates from this election cycle. I invented him before this cycle started. But anyway, as I was saying, a bank robber and a lawman staring each other down. It was the standoff of the century. But just when it seemed like Healy had things under control, Deputy, look out! He's coming in. Oh my gosh, that horse, the anatomy, the perspective, incredible. Wow. And the horse matches the rider. Wow. Now this was the real standoff of the century. End of the line, amigo. It's like, he's surrounded by criminals. As legendary as he was, could Healy really take on the High Noon Gang single-handedly? There was only one way this could end. What are you waiting for? Shoot him! With bloodshed. Bang. I watched in horror as the man's body crumpled to the ground like a tin can. What was this Meshuggah doing? And what if he set his sights on one of us next? All right, let's go. I had already lost my brother to the High Noon Gang. No, you hadn't. He's right there. I didn't want to end up the same way. Hey, give Idol back. She's a cute horse. She wins an award for cutest horse. And here in Yiddish, he's saying, that's my family's horse. I need it for my business. Come back here, you bastard. Jimmy the Kid shouts, Ghost, hurry up. Levinson is still swearing in Yiddish off in the corner. And now Ghost is running to his horse, and there's a tumbleweed, and he's running off into the distance on his horse, and the perspective is impeccable and makes sense. And it took a long time. Like a vault. And just like that, he's dead. The 5 bandits rode off, leaving a wake of destruction behind them. My son! In that moment, it became very clear to us all. There was no Deputy Sheriff Nick Healy. He was none other than Shootout McCloud, the leader of the High Noon Gang himself. And with him were Jesse Bell, Jimmy the Kid, Ghost, and Lucky Levi. And together they had just robbed the largest bank in the county. Well, if you'd like to thank you. If you'd like to hear more about High Noon, please join us in the Commonwealth Gallery across the street for some light refreshments. L'chaim, cowboys. Hercules, okay. No Hercules.
Any questions? I can't get it in either. Anybody have any questions?
Oh, yes.
At a time when both, like the last fight was both identity, you know, I probably say controversial, like attacks to the state of media. How do you find the powers talk about it in such a positive light and highlight that and not talk about the thing that's probably easier?
If I focus too much on the negative, I will cry. So I have to do something that will make me forget that there's something. At first it was hard because it used to be an escape for me, sort of drawing cowboys in the Wild West and all that. And then with recent events, it became a little bit difficult to write about a story in which, you know, these people have to hide certain things about themselves. But after a while, I just said, well, you just have to have fun with it. You know, draw a stupid looking horse. Be silly, make the guy's horse match his hair and eyes, I guess. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Actually, that's a really great question. I don't know if Ella told you to specific. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Bad joke. Bad joke. It's made me feel a lot more comfortable being myself, and I feel very proud. Like, this is me. This is who I am. I'm Chinese and I'm Jewish, and if people don't like it, that's not my problem. That's theirs. Thank you for the snap. Wow. Do we have time for? Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was trying to hit on, believe it or not. Thank you. Thank you. You heard it here, folks. But that is what I was trying to go for, because my family falls a little bit outside of the norm. You probably wouldn't, I don't think I've mentioned this enough times yet, but I am Chinese and I am Jewish. And one of the things that I did want, I mean, okay, you're seeing like the happy part, the glory days of the High Noon Gang. Later on, Shootout McCloud becomes a sad alcoholic, and they all go their separate ways and they hate each other. And then when they meet up again, when I say reunite the High Noon Gang, I mean like literally they all had to come back together because they hate each other. Because things went bad after the bank robbery. But it's okay because it's all better at the end of the story. But if you want to see more about it, you'll have to just ask me at the light refreshments. Yes, okay. Thank you.
So our last presenter for today is going to be Sandeep Badal. And Sandeep is going to be talking, I legitimately just forgot the name of his story out of the top of my head. I'm so sorry, Sandeep. But Ella wrote all of these down for me, so I do have it. Phantom in the Jar, thank you, sorry. So Sandeep is going to present his story, Phantom in the Jar. So if you guys could give me a warm welcome for Sandeep Badal.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Namaste. And thank you for coming. I know all of you are quite busy, and thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to come here, listen to me talk about how I spent the last 2 years. These last 2 years, I've been working on a project, on a book that has become an integral part of my life. And I'm very glad to share this book, this project, and this moment with you all. But before I talk about my book, I want to indulge a little bit on some description about myself. I want to talk a little bit about myself. I'm Sandeep Badal. I come from Kathmandu, Nepal. And that is my home right about there. I come from there, and before coming here to pursue MFA in visual narrative, I did my undergrad from India. I did my undergrad from India in painting and printmaking. And after that, I spent the almost next decade working on film and advertising. And that was because I was very interested in writing stories, telling stories, and both of those professions sort of provided me with an opportunity to do that, to write and tell stories. But to be frank, I did not really enjoy my experience at advertising. It was a very corporate hellhole. And there were a lot of restrictions in how I wanted to tell stories. But I really, really enjoyed my time working in movies. It gave me creative freedom. It taught me a lot of things about how I wanted to tell stories, what kind of stories I wanted to tell. And these were the opportunities that I was getting. But even though I loved filmmaking a lot and I loved telling stories via the medium of film, it is a very well-known fact that it's not a very solitary kind of medium. It's like the total eclipse that we just had. Everything has to line up at the exact same place. 50 to 100 different people on the same schedule at the same time. So it also comes with a lot of restrictions, despite all the creative satisfaction. And so I started wondering if I wanted to tell a lot of stories, but do I want to tell all of them via film? And I came to that realization during COVID when I was in lockdown. And I was doing twice the work, getting paid half. And then it came to my realization, maybe I wanted to tell stories in other way. And that is when I was drawing a lot of comics. I went back to my sort of childhood obsession, a childhood love, I don't know, of reading comics and drawing comics. And I was drawing a lot of them during COVID when I was in lockdown. Why was I drawing? How was the love of comics and visual narrative and graphic novel that came into me? Was I grew up reading a lot of Indian superhero comics and mythological stories. And most of these stories, the mythological stories, they came from my grandmother, my mother's mother, who was really into stories, but she had never gone to schools. She didn't know how to read. So she would buy us books, and then she made us recite those stories as a kid. So that is where my love for stories came from. And my father used to buy me comics, the Indian superhero comics, a lot when I was growing up. So my love for comics came from that. And along with them, I grew up watching Spider-Man and X-Men animated. I grew up in the 90s. So all of those things, all of those stories kind of instilled the love for comics and stories and all of that in me. So I decided, hey, maybe I want to pursue a master's degree in the medium that will let me tell stories visually. I had a background in painting and I was working in film, so I sort of wanted to combine both of them in one form. So I decided to pursue MFA. I applied for a Fulbright scholarship, I got it, and it was that easy. And I came to the USA after almost 36 hours of flight. I came here in fall 2022. And from the moment our classes started, I already knew the story that I wanted to tell. I was very aware. I knew that I wanted to write fiction. For a moment, I almost thought maybe I should write a memoir, but then I don't know, went into this reflective mode and realized nothing profound had happened in my life for me to tell a memoir. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to stick to fiction. And I'm going to not write a sad story. I'm going to write a very happy story. But that will be about all kinds of relationship and love. And it's going to be about their celebration and all of that. So I knew the exact type of story that I wanted to tell. And the first semester I worked on it, I wrote the script and I started drawing, I did thumbnails and everything. Then at the start of our spring semester, the first couple of weeks of February of 2023, my father passed away. And due to a lot of personal and circumstantial reason, I couldn't go back home. And the story at that moment, I was alone, far from family, and I was struggling to sort of deal with the grief that came with it. And I thought, okay, I'll find a sort of an, escape in my stories, which are happy and which are going to be about relationships. But suddenly the story that I was writing started feeling shallow. It wasn't deep enough. I couldn't relate to the story that I was telling personally, not because I didn't like the characters. I still love the character. I still love the story, but something felt missing. What I was experiencing at the time, the emotions that I was feeling, and the story that I was writing, there was a disconnect of some sort. So I thought, what can I do? How can I address this emotion without writing a memoir? As I just said, nothing profound has happened in my life. Without writing a memoir, how am I going to address those emotions? So I thought, what if all of my characters stay the same? What if the story remains the same? But right before everything that I had planned happens, my protagonist, my character, also receives the news that his father has passed away. How will that impact the story? How is that going to affect everything that happens there onwards? And thus was born Phantom in a Jar. Phantom in a Jar is a surreal drama about Vinay, who is a queer immigrant writer illustrator based in New York, and who finds himself haunted by his recently deceased father. This is about Vinay's struggles to come in terms with the grief that he's feeling at that time. But it is also about the conversation that he never had with his father, and he can never have now onwards. So it is about the conversation that he never had now start manifesting into guilt. And that guilt starts affecting his work, his relationships. And this book is about the exploration of how that happens, how a loss of a certain family member, a certain close one, affects our work, our other relationships. It is about that. And interspersed with Binay's story, because it is a story also about writer, about illustrator. So this story is about Binay is also writing comics. He's drawing a comics of superhero comics. And the superhero comics features a lesbian trans femme superhero who start questioning her role as a hero in a society that has suddenly started treating her like a villain. I borrow a lot of elements of her character, Tamas, which means darkness in Sanskrit, her character from Hindu mythology and Hindu culture and Nepali culture. And I felt it was very important to tell this particular story as a comic within comic because of everything that is happening around the world. But also because of the socio-political situation in South Asia, in Nepal, and how the rise of the Hindu nationalism is sort of discarding their own mythological history in order to, spread violence. So this is about Vinay, who is this illustrator who is going through his own grief and who has lost his father, and about the comic that is telling, and about in that comic, it's a character who's struggling with her own, struggling with the society that used to treat her like a goddess until a couple of days ago, and now suddenly has started treating her like a villain. So through both of these stories, my aim is to explore themes of identity and belonging and grief, guilt, and how do we heal through our interpersonal relationship and our dynamics and how that helps. For this, my idea is to explore, I draw in a very mundane, I like to draw mundane things because I feel we can explore a lot of characteristics when we draw mundane things. You can tell a lot about people by what they do when there's nothing else to do. So it is about that, but at the same time, the absurdity, the surrealism. So there is all of this is kind of an amalgamation of the mythological story that I grew up reading, the comics that I grew up reading, and also the films that I ended up making or working in. So through these themes and through these emotions, my idea is to create a narrative that delves into the complexities of human emotions and relations. So next, I'm going to show you a video of some of the pages of my comics that I've been working in. And these feature how Vinay, the character, is being haunted by his father, but it also shows him at his most mundane, when he's at home doing work, his drawing. And I want you to see it. Do we have speakers? Yeah. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? Thank you for asking. So there's a, how do I say this? So throughout the story, there's a motif of hair. in both the main story of Vinay as well as the story within the comics that he's drawing. So in our culture, in Nepali Hindu culture, but in the Hindu culture in general, whenever your parents pass away, you shave all of the hair in your body, but mainly your head. And it is very important because it is kind of seen as a sign of respect, a sign of devotion, but also a sign of cleanliness. So the hair that we see, the hair in which the form in which his father returns, he returns in the form of the hair that he shaved when his father passed away, and he kept it in a jar. So his father returns to haunt him in that form. But even within the comics, the superhero that is drawing, she's a trans femme woman. So, which in our society, the way we perceive very stereotypical male and female categories and standard, it always sort of relates to hair, right? So long hair, it's a female, short hair, it's male, kind of sort of rules that we have made up. And so here she has a flaming hair, and that here sort of signifies her power, and which I also borrow from Hindu god Agni, who's the god of fire, who was in a sort of a relationship with another male god, but at the same time, his gender identity could also sort of becomes, I don't know, hasn't properly been explained because we know that Agni also gave birth. So here sort of connects all of those societal expectation, cultural expectation, but at the same time, the rules that society have sort of created to entrap everyone else. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Sort of in a way. My father and I had when I was a kid, we had a very good relationship. And as I became a teenager, I think it is very common amongst everyone else. You start having a sort of problem with the parents. And he and I sort of diverged in our ways, in the way we perceive things when I became a teenager. And it sort of continued until he had passed away. So I guess there were a lot of things that I never talked to my father that happened during or after I became a teenager. So it could be a way, it is a way for me to talk to him. And you mentioned about him, Vinay, having a conversation with his father. I don't want to give the spoiler away. But yeah, the idea behind, one of the key idea behind the conclusion of the book is that it is the solution lies in conversation and not exactly fight, as Binay comes to realize that he cannot win his father by fighting. He has to have a conversation with him, which is sort of the climactic moment in the book. Thank you. Anyone? Yeah.
Sometimes that last like cloud.
No. That is intentional, actually. The main story, the Vinay's story, the main story, it is drawn in more realistic kind of way, in the way that I usually draw. For the comic part, the comic that he's drawing, the superhero story part, I wanted to draw it as much close I can get to the early DC and Marvel comics and that kind of style. But the cloud part is especially important because I sort of took that from the Buddhist and Hindu, Buddhist Tanka and Pauba paintings. And the character of the superhero character of Jyoti or Tamas, he comes from a family who are Vajrayana Buddhist, and they are the ones who paint Pauba paintings. So I wanted to bring those details of our cultural identity into the comics that I was drawing as well. Thank you. Any more? Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. I hope that you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed seeing these comics develop over the last 2 years. It's been my pleasure to help these cartoonists get their work out into the world, and I hope you guys will join us for our reception across the street. Thank you so much. Like I said, some people might have comics, so if you got some money, you might want to ask some people if they're selling anything. But thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. That I don't have it. They have it. So that's we'll get it. We will get it. Yeah, we'll get it.